Okay, thank you to Paul Lynch for taking this video call,
My
and
pleasure.
thanks for your time. In spite of the many commitments during this period, for the launch of your new novel, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Grace.
So you are a critic, film critic. You have written regularly for the Sunday Time on film, and also you have written for the Irish Time and a lot of
Yeah.
newspapers.
So I've officially retired from journalism. I yeah
Officially, yeah.
I stopped a few years ago just to concentrate on my novels.
That sounds good. because
Journalism is exhausting. It's too much work.
yeah. And now with the baby, I think it's
Now
much
we have a
more.
baby, so it's even
Yeah.
more exhausting. So it's like a little bit of time for writing and this much time for being a dad.
How did change your working way during the day? Your
It's tricky. The first year was very difficult because I had to figure out how to create a work-life balance. I work very early in the morning and I work up to kind of lunchtime, and then I would take over and mind the child. But what I found was that the long day of minding a young baby was killing my mind. It's very difficult work, and I wasn't getting time to think. And so it's much better now that we have a childminder. So I figured it out.
Today we speak about your first novel, the only one for now published in Italy by 66 and the Second.
Yeah.
The Italian title is Cielo Rosso al Mattino, just like in English. And this has been published in 2013, and in Italy also only this year. And I have to say that this is one of the best book I read this year. This
You're
is
very
why
kind.
I thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
You are born in 1977. You are so young because
Really, I don't feel young. Oh my goodness.
because I was born in 1977, so we are the same age. And this is my first question. What did this turning point mean to you and for your career as writer?
It's interesting. For me, 40 was like this strange line, kind of almost like a midlife line where you can see it. Everyone who comes to meet it stares at it and feels a certain terror. And so I could see 40 approaching. And for me, I wanted to meet 40 and feel that I'd achieved something. And that achievement was not a measure of success in the real world. It was a measure of achievement in writing for me in my work, as in my own sense of myself. And so I wanted to write 4 good novels by the time I was 40. And so I've done that. I have written, my 3rd book's been published now, but the 4th book, I finished it just before I turned 40. Or at least I finished a major draft of the book. So for me, I feel that I achieved something for myself. I wrote 4 books that I'm pleased with. I'm going to take it easy now in my 40s.
This book, The Red Sky in the Morning, is a novel, and it's set in Donegal in United States in 1832. We have a protagonist, Con Coyle, and a deuteragonist, too, John Fowler, correct? Just like in all the best tragedies, I would say. So, what label would you sew on your novel? Because many people say this is a thriller, many say noir. Is it a tragedy actually, or
It's literature.
literature?
Literature. It's nothing else. It's literature. I mean, you mentioned tragedy. There's certainly an aspect of ancient tragedy at work in the novel. There's a sense of that kind of vast eternity in the backdrop of the novel. The sense that the problems that these characters are fighting are eternal problems. They're recurring problems, and also the voice of Sera in the novel deliberately for me evokes that kind of Greek chorus. You know, where the chorus is trying to make sense of what's going on, and so I consider the book a tragedy, a neo tragedy. You know, for sure there are elements of the thriller in the book, but it's literature. You know, I don't think about my writing as anything else.
Meanwhile, I have to show the book. Okay, and. Can I know that maybe you told already several times your first time, but do you want to tell us about your first time? I mean the anecdote about how was born this novel, because I heard that you were in Sicily, correct? Where I spent my holidays.
You know, yes, true. I was avoiding writing for a long time. I was doing my damnedest, trying not to become a novelist. I knew deep down that I needed to write, but I wasn't doing it. And so I was working for a newspaper. I was working as the newspaper's film critic. I was also working on the editorial back desk. I was very, very busy, working 6 days a week a lot of the time. And this little voice all the time was saying, you need to write, I need to write. And for a long time I had been suppressing it because I felt that I loved fiction too much. I loved literature too much. And I didn't want to be a writer who would just bring out to the world some vanity project. I didn't want to write unless it could be really good. But I reached a point, I was in Lipari in Sicily. I was in a taxi, I was going up a hill, going to a hotel, and I literally, like that, just had this like lightning strike, this epiphany, this realization that my life was wrong, that it was all wrong, and that if I didn't start now and change my life and become the person I was meant to be, I would regret it for the rest of my life. And I knew it, I could feel it, you know, I could just feel that there was something very powerful and it was being completely ignored. And so I arrived at the hotel and I literally took out my laptop and started writing. And then 6 months later, I began in earnest writing Red Sky and Morning.
Wonderful. But what was the first scene you wrote that night or that day?
Well, the first thing I wrote that day was actually a short story that had been in my head for ages that I was trying not to write it. And then I started to write it. So I wrote this short story and very quietly I showed it to a few people who I, would respect. And they said, that's not bad. You should write more. So I wrote another story. I wrote another story. And I wrote another story. And what happened over those 4 stories was I found my voice. So I started out trying to sound like, you should sound like this in a short story. By the time I got to the 4th story, I knew who I was. And then I started writing Red Sky pretty much soon after that.
But was this the first image we had reading the novel?
I write sequentially, so I think that's the first sentence is the first thing I did. I've spent many months just writing the first few pages.
Oh, okay.
Because it takes time. It takes time to find the music, the song of a book. You have to search for how a book sounds to the ear before you can proceed. You can't just start writing. You have to find the tone, and the first sentence has to be perfect, and the second sentence has to follow perfectly after the first. And so you spend time finding it, and then when you find it, you can move. You can start moving with it. So that was the journey.
And did you choose the title of the novel, or?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Wonderful.
It came to me while I was writing.
Mhm. And from the first page, the red color of the sky jumps out. Mm. Uh, Actually, from the very first lines, in all the shades of the blood, of the fire, etc., etc. What does this color mean to you? I would like to read just the first lines in Italian, just to let understand the readers. Uh, It's written, I can read now. Il cielo della notte era nero quando uno squarcio di luce color sangue spuntò ai confini del mondo. La marea scarlatta attenuò il chiarore delle stelle, le colline uscirono dall'ombra e le nuvole presero forma. La pioggia del mattino cadde da un cielo muto e fece risuonare la terra. E poi ancora si parla di oscurità, di raggi di luce, prima rossi, poi dorati, e via dicendo. Il rosso, red color is very...
Yeah.
Is kind of,
Well, in English, perhaps in Italian, we have an expression. It says red sky morning, shepherd's warning.
Yeah, we have also.
So, that red dawn is, he sees it on a day that's a very significant day, because he is deciding to do something that he should not do, which is he's deciding to confront this man, the son of the landlord. And sorry, my phone was ringing there. Just turning it off. He was, and the warning is in the sky. The blood is in the sky. This sense of that something is going to happen. It's almost being foretold. He's reading it, he sees it, and yet he still persists. And as he persists, something the opposite happens, which is he kills the man. And from that single moment, the entire book is born. But also all the lives of all the characters in the book are changed. The fate of his whole family are altered forever. And so it's there's a lot of blood spilled, and so red is the dominant color of the book.
Yes, it is. And let's talk about writing techniques. The novel seems to me full of clues and portents, which can be found in the description of the characters' facial features, or in the landscape description also, like the red sky. And all these clues inform the reader that something's going to happen. Yeah? For example, let me see. When you write about the teeth, like tombstones, and then something happens. I won't tell now what will happen, but there are a lot of clues. So it seems to be a steady factor of your novel. Did you choose to do it?
The sound has disappeared here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you're back again. It's a steady factor of the novel. You were saying, and I don't think about this when I'm writing. I'm not
so
even
natural,
in charge. I'm not even in charge when I'm writing. There's somebody else in charge. It's another Paul Lynch. He speaks from up there or down here somewhere. And maybe he sees these things happening, but I don't. But certainly the writing is. I'm always very interested in capturing not just the essential aspects of life unfolding, such as what we see and the sensuality of what we see in the world and how the characters interact with the world, but also the things we can't see, our intuitions, our feelings that pass through us and we don't quite know what they are. So characters are always alert to things that are passing through their minds, but they don't quite know what they are sometimes. And I try and capture this through language, try and put words together in different ways to convey that sense of the liminal or that unspoken feelings that we get, because I think they're a big part of life. They're a big part of the mystery, and it's the mystery that interests me as a writer. It's that infinite mystery of life in its unfolding that is what I want to bring the reader into at all times.
So you mean nothing was planned at the table, studied and decided before put it in writing or
written? When I write a novel, I have a sense of what's going to happen, but only in a very broad, schematic way. I know there's a beginning, and I know there's a middle, and there's an end, and I usually have an idea of where that is because I get images. I have images in my mind, and for me, writing is just joining up these images. But despite that, the novels for me are created by the characters. The novel is not a preordained story in which the characters are made to fit. The characters unfold the story in the writing through their behavior, through who they are, and I have to pay attention to that. I have to listen to them and watch them, and I make them do things, but I'm following them so that the end result is that the story feels not just organic but true. It feels that it has human truth rather than coming out from the other way where you're forcing a character to do something because you want them to do it. That's not how I work. So for me, every day is a mystery. I sit down and I don't know quite where I'm going to go, and I just pay attention to what's happening, and I try look for and create the feeling of inevitability that the next thing that happens has to happen because all of these things have happened, that this is what this person is going to do next because this is who they are. And so that for me is the process.
Yeah, that's very illuminating. Thank you very much indeed for this information. The first part, I noted a lot of techniques, but maybe it's all about my imagination. I don't know. In fact, next question is about the two parts of the novel. The first part is full abundant with offal, piles of guts, and carcasses, excreta, piss, etc., etc. And until we enter a tavern, and all kind of fog and smokes gain the leading role. Okay, the door of the tavern opens and mist appears, and the same will clear later. I guess 20 pages later, more or less, when Cole will close the door of the tavern. Just before boarding on the vessel to US. And from this point on, the journey starts and all sounds much more poetic to me. And the second part of the novel is the journey to US. And I read some critics and some people say that this is the weakest part of the novel because it's too long. But this is not what I think about it, because I found that a lot of things happens on board the vessel to US, and it's not.
The middle part is essential.
Yeah, yes, essential.
Essential. There's no book without the middle part. Anybody who thinks that is just somebody who wants a thriller, and they want the story to be rolling on like a thriller.
Yeah.
Each the book is in 3 parts, and each part is significantly different than the part that came before. Each part has its own character, and each part has its own necessity. I love the second part. I think it's my favorite part of the book.
You already answered to my question, so okay.
Have I answered it already?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the second part is I think it's deeply interesting because all the essential character development actually unfolds in the second part of the book. But what holds my fascination is the idea that we travel to America in the hold of the boat, deep down inside the boat, and very, very little do we see the outside of the boat. And most times when we read fiction that deals with ships at sea, 19th century, 18th century. We always see it from the point of view of sailors. We see it from the point of view, of the objective, looking at the ship in the storm. We see it that way. But I made a decision that we should only see what the people who are on these horrific ships get to experience, which is very little. And so at one point in the novel, in this section, there's a storm, and the crew lock them in downstairs, and they experience a storm for 2 or 3 days in darkness, with some candles that are been knocked around the place, and stench, and people screaming, and the madness of it. And it's to me, it's like almost, I guess that's one of the most visually powerful moments for me in the whole novel. And it kind of approaches that idea of that 19th century idea of the sublime, that sense of coming up against something, and something that's overwhelmingly full of terror, that we feel overwhelmed by, that these characters can't quite see. They can't see what they're in. They're in the storm and they can't even see it. And it's happening now. It's happening with the boats coming from Egypt and from Libya and arriving at Lampedusa. It's the same thing, like it's terrifying, and so I think it's interesting to remind people. Italians can do with being reminded right now about that. The Syrians now are the Irish. In 100 years' time, 200 years' time, there will be Syrians who will be accepted as a normal part of whatever society they're living in, writing novels about this stuff.
I'm wondering how you could catch all these feelings of the passengers. I mean, and this is what the next question. Where did you get started to write the navigation part? And if you have ever traveled by ocean, I mean, on board vessel from UK maybe to United States.
I hate to break it to you, but I made it up. It's my job as a novelist to imagine.
Imagination, yeah.
To imagine. I've been on boats, and I obviously had to do some research. And there are some diaries that people have made on these types of trips, and so I've read that stuff. But the main thing is that I'm a novelist, and so I have to actually dream it into reality. And so that's what I do. I spend time dreaming it out until I feel it's real.
Yeah, there are a lot of dreams in the novel. The protagonist.
Life is full of dream. Life is a dream.
So they are very important here. So now, one thing really popped out from the novel: all people are ready to betray their own kind. Is this your conviction? I mean, or is it just fiction?
I'm not sure that the translation of that, I understand the actual English corresponding part, because it doesn't sound, I don't recognize it, but then again, I haven't read the book for a few years, so, but the fact is I'm not Fowler, and I'm not Col Coyle, and these characters in their own right, and so Fowler is not a mouthpiece for me. Mm-hmm. He's not a mouthpiece for the author. Fowler is Fowler. Fowler represents his own worldview. What that worldview is well, it's not a very pretty thing. There's you could say he's nihilistic. He doesn't quite see the human value of things. And what I will say is that the part of me that is the author is the person who's watching this kind of battle between Col Coyle, who believes in the meaning of his own life, the meaning of life, and Fowler, who believes in very little. And there's this kind of duality in my work, all my novels, between kind of humanism and post-humanism. This idea that what makes us human, our values are absolutely unique and should be celebrated and are the center of the world. And at the same time, this post-humanistic view which would see ourselves, within a vast cosmos that which we have absolutely no meaning, within a universe that's 14 billion years old, that we're a cosmic accident, and that at the end everything goes to dust, and what's left. These two things are always in debate somewhere in my novels, because we all like to feel that we have meaning. We all feel that we exist, and we want to celebrate life, but at the same time, life is tremendously short, and eternity is tremendously long. And so I'm interested in that problem, which is essentially the problem of how do we live.
Yeah. And so we come back to the beginning, at the beginning of this interview, when you told that there was it was a critic period before you decided to start writing, to become a writer in all senses. I mean, to dedicate your life to the literature. So when your first novel was published, I read that the editors were fighting to get the rights of your first novel.
Yeah.
Would you ever have expected this, and how did you feel?
I didn't expect it, because I was told that the book was difficult, and that I was, I remember the phrase because I laughed. I was told I was high-end literary fiction. And, in other words, I'm a serious writer, but serious, or, and, yeah, I'm a serious writer, but I didn't think it would be difficult. I thought it would be difficult, but I didn't think it would be impossible. And I was told it would be very difficult by an agent. And lots of agents turned me down because they said it would be too difficult to publish me. So when that happened, it was very interesting, and it was very exciting. But looking back on it now is also a lot of nonsense, because there's two worlds at play always. There's the commercial world of publishing, which really doesn't make much sense to me, having been in it now for 5 years, watching the decisions that get made, watching how people think. It's a bizarre industry. Whereas the actual writing itself is the quiet, fundamental part of what this is. And so, just get on with it is how I think about it,
Yeah. Last question, and then you are free to to enjoy your
I'm free to have more wine.
Yeah. And your white wine, Italian white wine. Do you like Prosecco? I read about
my wife drinks an awful lot of Prosecco.
Yeah.
It's in this house all the time.
Because now there's I read an article in the Guardian about the Prosecco and the Italian white wine, that it's dangerous. So I hope you keep drinking Italian white wine. Anyway, last question is about Black Snow and the other novels coming soon, I hope, hopefully, to Italy. Can you tell us something about Black Snow?
Well, the Black Snow is a very different type of energy from Red Sky. Red Sky is this kind of very propulsive novel. It is essentially an explosion, and everything that happens in that book, happens as a result of that explosive moment. Black Snow is like a whirlpool, slowly pulling everything in. It's a very different type of book. I think it's more serious. I think it's a harder book. But I think it's a better novel. And it takes a different point of view on immigration. Generally speaking, we tell the stories about those who immigrate, but this book looks at a man called Barnabas Kane, who was somebody who emigrated to America as a child, but comes back to Ireland as a self-made man with money, and he builds a big farm, and he has an Irish-American wife, and he has a teenage son, and he's the kind of man who is kind of smug and quietly happy about his life. He doesn't really think about much beyond his beyond that. But the book opens with a fire that destroys everything, and he has to rebuild the farm. And so the book is about two things: his attempt to rebuild the farm, but also how himself and his wife and his son privately all tried to figure out who started the fire. And each character comes to believe that the fire was started by a person, or this person, or that person. And quietly each person starts to act upon their convictions. But it's actually never revealed. We don't learn who starts the fire, yet the characters act as if they know. And so in their behavior, they actually bring about their own, the kind of the book's tragedy, that each character moves forward in certainty, and it pulls the strings together of what is it? Because the book is another tragedy, and so for me, it's an examination of human blindness. It's something I'm very interested in.
I really love it. Okay.
Yeah.
I will get my copy. Thank you very much indeed, Paul Lynch.
My pleasure.
I hope to meet you maybe in Italy soon, so you can sign my copy.
Yeah, well, next time I'm in Milan,
yeah.
Come to Asti when I'm there in October.
Okay. Thank you again. And
Pleasure. Thank you for
have a
having me.
good evening. Talk to you soon, hope.
Ciao.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.